During the takeoff roll, a short metal strip about 43 centimeters falls off the right-hand engine of the DC-10. There are no indications in the cockpit about this, there's no warnings, and the crew just continues to fly towards the destination. Because this happens only a few minutes prior to the Concorde departure, there are no runway inspections that could have picked this up. In fact, in France at the time, there was only mandated 2 runway inspections per day. The Concorde is now taxiing and getting closer to the holding position on Romeo for runway 26 right, and the captain does a takeoff briefing. Now this is something that we always tend to do, where we do a little bit of a quick summary of the most important points before we depart. And the captain says, so the takeoff is at maximum takeoff weight, 180 tons 100, which means 4 reheats with maximum N2 of 103 and a failure N2 of 98%. Between 0 and 100 knots, I stop for any oral warning and the tire flash. And the tire flash and the call out is coming from you, right? Between 100 knots and V1, I ignore the gong, I stop for an engine fire, a tire flash and a failure call out. After V1, we will continue on the standard instrument departure as we just talked about, and will land back on runway 26 right. So this is a pretty standard takeoff briefing from a captain. It outlines what the crew are expected to do in case of a rejected takeoff in the low speed regime, which in this case in the Concorde is between 0 knots and 100 knots. They basically stop for anything. The gong that they're referring to is what would be equivalent to a master caution warning in a Boeing. It's just a oral warning that some kind of failure has occurred. It might not be a critical failure. And then from 100 knots up to V1, they're a little bit more restrictive because they're now in the high speed regime of the takeoff. So from that point, they only stop for engine fire warning, failure warning, and in this case also what they call a tire flash. A tire flash is a warning light that comes on if the system feels a sudden loss of pressure in one of the tires. Now, in the Boeing that I fly, we do not stop for a burst tire above 80 knots. But in the Concorde's case, it has proven to be a much bigger problem, so it's included in one of those critical failures that they will stop for in the high-speed regime. And above V1, they are committed to the takeoff. So all pilots are trained that after V1, if you would reject at that point, you will do a potentially catastrophic runway excursion. So instead, we bring the aircraft into the air, sort out any problem. And in this case, they're discussing coming back to land at a very long runway 26 right again in Paris. But as we're about to learn, the failure that these pilots are about to experience is going to be much more complicated than that. The captain now also asks the flight engineer how much fuel they've used during the taxi, because remember, in the load sheet they had 2 tons calculated. The flight engineer responds with, we've got 800 kilos there. So this would indicate that they're actually using about a ton less of taxi fuel, and since they were already at the maximum takeoff weight, using the 2 ton of taxi fuel that they were supposed to use, if they've used a ton less, it means that they're now about 800 kilos above maximum takeoff weight. The flight engineer at this point also says, brake temperature is checked at 150. And the captain asks, is it hotter on the left or the right side? The flight engineer says that it's about the same. And that's going to turn out to be a really important statement for the investigation later on.